Well, hello there. I have a little quiz for you. Which one of these unsuspicious cargo vessels do you think is actually a German warship? I know they all look rather boring, but stay with me here. Oh, you have decided? I'll cut you short. It was a trick question anyway. All of them are German warships, of course. Though, in this video, we will only talk about this one, the Atlantis. And I hear your questions like, this is literally just a merchant ship. Zero armor, no armament at all. How could this be considered a warship? Well, that's what I'm here to tell you, so sit tight, we'll get to that. It's the Second World War because for some reason one wasn't enough and the Germans have a problem. The enemies are being reinforced with resources and men from their colonies and the US. But to win a war against most of Europe, this steady flow of supplies has to cease. How does one go about that? The obvious answer, learned from the previous World War, was submarines. And while the Germans had quite a lot of U-boats, they thought it not enough. The Atlantis, formerly known as Goldenfels, was your standard rinky-dinky cargo ship. Up until 1939, when she was requisitioned by the Kriegsmarine to be converted into a warship. The idea was to put armaments on an unsuspicious cargo vessel and hide them in a way that they don't stand out. Then slap on a disguise and cosplay, for example, as a Japanese ship. So the Germans started adding guns and fake decks to the Atlantis. And they kinda overkilled the let's put light armament on a cargo ship up until the Atlantis had about the firepower of a light cruiser. All in all, the Atlantis had 6 150mm, one 75mm and 2 twin 37mm anti-air cannons, and 4 torpedo tubes. 2 disassembled Heinkel He-114C seaplanes were stored in her now unused cargo compartments. But the most important piece of equipment by far were her multiple disguises. For example, they took an extra dummy funnel and multiple masts of variable height with them to change the silhouette of the ship at any moment. On top of that, they had tons of paint to repaint the entire ship and costumes for the crew to wear while on deck. The Atlantis, known to the Germans as Ship 16 and to the British as Raider C, was, as I will show you, under the command of Kapitän zur See Bernhard Rogge, quite successful in her mission, but we'll get to know them as we go along. After being requisitioned with 9 other merchant ships to be converted into a surface raider, she started her voyage on the 31st of March 1940. Disguised as the Norwegian motor ship Knud Nelson, she sailed past the North Sea minefields and headed for Iceland. Before crossing the Arctic Circle between Iceland and Greenland, they changed their disguise to the Soviet vessel Kim. On the 24th of April 1940, they crossed the equator and once again changed their disguise to now reflect the look of a Japanese cargo vessel named Kaze Imaru. On the 2nd of May 1940, the Atlantis spotted her first possible victim. The Atlantis changed into an interception course until the other ship was identified as the SS City of Exeter, a passenger liner. Worried about possible civilian casualties, Captain Rogge declined to attack. Their presence wasn't unnoticed though, and after the Atlantis had left, the City of Exeter radioed their suspicions about a random Japanese vessel to the Royal Navy. But just a day later, they spotted another ship. This time, it was no passenger liner, but the British cargo ship Scientist. Closing in on the Scientist, the Atlantis dropped her disguise and raised the German war flag. Firing one warning shot, they broadcasted, "Stop or I fire. Do not use your radio." Which, in itself, doesn't seem like too hard of an order to understand, but the British still started transmitting an alarm signal, and the Germans, just as promised, opened fire. Within minutes, the scientist was ablaze and then abandoned. The cast crew was brought on board of the Atlantis as POWs, and the scientist was finished off with a torpedo. A week later, on the 10th of May, they reached Cape Agulhas and set up a minefield of 92 horned mines. That are these spiky boys. They laid them in a way to make it look like a U-boat laid them, as not to alert the Royal Navy of a possible raider nearby. This effort was in vain though, as a German propaganda broadcast proudly and honestly quite stupidly boasted about a solitary raider laying a minefield in the Royal Navy's backyard. So just to be safe, Rogge ordered their disguise to be changed to the Dutch vessel Averkirk. Sailing under the Dutch flag, they headed towards the Indian Ocean. After an eventless month, on the 10th of June, finally, a ship was spotted. As soon as the Germans dropped their disguise, the ship tried to flee and a chase began. The ship, which turned out to be the Norwegian motor ship Tirana, transporting supplies for the Australian troops in the Middle East, was finally captured after a 3-hour chase and a combined 30 salvos from the Atlantis. The Tirana was boarded and later, under control of a few German sailors, sent to France to be used for German shipping. A month and a day later, they found the British merchant ship City of Baghdad, which, after surrendering, was boarded. The boarding party discovered a copy of a book called Broadcasting for Allied Merchant Ships. Furthermore, a copy of the report from the SS City of Exeter, the first ship they encountered, was found describing the Atlantis in minute detail, as the Japanese disguise was not believed. Rogge then ordered 2 new masts to be added to alter the ship's profile. Over the next 5-ish month, they sunk 7 further ships and captured 2. The Kemendine, Talleyrand, King City, Athelking, Banati, Commissar Ramel, Demeter, Teddy and Old Jacob. One of the captured ships, the tanker Old Jacob, did not yet depart to Axis-controlled territories, but instead followed the Atlantis in a sort of convoy. On the 11th of November, the Atlantis crew and captain were to encounter the ship with the most valuable cargo yet. Although Rogge and his crew didn't know that quite yet. At 7 AM in the morning, the Automedon was sighted, and course was altered to intercept. The Automedon, spotting the German raider and seeing through its disguise, tried to flee at full steam. At 8:20 AM, the Atlantis shot a warning shot, and the Automedon began transmitting. RRRR, Automedon 0416N. The code RRRR, meaning under attack by radar. But the Atlantis had a higher top speed than the Automedon and slowly but steadily closed the distance. At 10 AM, the Atlantis came within firing range of the Automedon and began shelling her at 1,800 meters distance, but ceasing fire after just 3 minutes. Having destroyed the Automedon's bridge, accommodations and lifeboats, the Automedon had surrendered. The Germans boarding the heavily damaged ship found 15 bags of top-secret mail for the British Far East Command. Further search revealed a small weighted green bag marked highly confidential. This report within that green bag contained the latest assessment of the Japanese Empire's military strength, along with details about Royal Air Force units and naval capabilities of Great Britain within the Far East. All in all, it declared Britain to be too weak to risk war with Japan. At 3 PM, the Automedon was sunk. The found documents were transferred to the captured tanker Old Jacob, and with a prize crew of 7 Germans sent on their way to Japan. The Japanese, after realizing just how valuable these informations were for their plans, awarded Rogge with an ornate katana. By the way, the only other Germans to ever receive such an honorary gift were Hermann Göring and Erwin Rommel. In all seriousness though, the capture of these top secret documents very likely had a much bigger impact than Rogge and his crew could have ever imagined. With the knowledge of Britain not being able to put up a fight against Japan, the Japanese had to worry about only one other contestant to the Pacific, the United States of America. That's why the capture of this secret cargo is believed to have, at least to a degree, caused the attack on Pearl Harbor, and more noticeable, caused the fall of Singapore. This was, without doubt, the biggest catch any of the German surface raiders had done and will ever do. But it's not the end of the story. About a month later, another surface raider, her sister ship the Penguin, calls the Atlantis, having seized the tanker Start with suitable fuel for the Atlantis. They meet up, and with their fuel tanks filled once again, they head for the Kerguelen Islands to replenish and repair. Around Christmas, anchoring at Kerguelen Island, Rogge and his crew were to experience their first loss of life. While repainting the funnel of the Atlantis, one of the sailors fell off his ladder and was killed on impact. The Germans buried him honorably on the island, and his grave is often referred to as the southernmost of all German war graves. They had to take down the cross before leaving though, as not to alert the Allied navies to the presence of a German raider nearby. Then they headed back into the Indian Ocean. End of December up until the 2nd of February 1942, they sunk the freighter Mandsaur, captured the freighter Speybank, and captured the tanker Ketty Brevik. Using the fuel from the Ketty Brevik, they replenished not only their own resources but also supplied the Panzerschiff Admiral Scheer and the small Italian coastal submarine Perla. What this submarine was doing so far from any Italian or German harbor in the middle of the sea is another story for another day. But in his memoirs, Rogge remarked his respect and admiration for Lieutenant Knapp, the commander of the Italian submarine. On the 17th of April 1941, the Egyptian passenger liner Zamzam was mistaken for a troopship and fired upon. They captured 140 crew and 202 passengers, among which was the American journalist David E. Sherman. At this point in time, the USA was still officially neutral towards Nazi Germany, so Rogge had to be extra cautious with his American guests. Fearing another RMS Lusitania incident, that's the reason why the US joined the war against Germany in the First World War, if you didn't know. Although I hope you did, I mean it's a pretty important piece of history, even more if you're interested in naval warfare, or any kind of warfare for that matter. You really don't even need to be like a nerd for warships to know the Lusitania. Even if she wasn't even a warship. Yeah, but I'm veering off track. Fearing another RMS Lusitania incident, Rogge let the prisoners, and especially the journalists from the Zamzam, roam the ship rather freely and take photos of whatever they wanted. He treated them as good as possible, and for a short amount of time, the Atlantis was more of a fun passenger liner with people playing cards and just enjoying the sun, rather than a warship disguised to operate behind enemy lines. A few days later, all the civilians and the crew of the Zamzam were taken on board the blockade runner Dresden, which brought them back to Europe. Obviously, Rogge tried seizing all the footage the American journalists had took of his ship, but they managed to smuggle some of it out inside a pack of toothpaste. Sherman and the other American journalists, being inhabitants of a then neutral country, were transferred to the United States, from where Sherman gave the films to the Royal Navy. That, and you can quote me on that, was a problem, as now the British knew very well how to identify the Atlantis, even if disguised. But until the Royal Navy had all of their warships and merchant ships informed, Some time will pass, so for now our little pirate ship was still free to roam unidentified. As the Atlantis had been on her mission for a little more than a full year, Rogge had promised his men to return to Germany as soon as possible, and so they made their way towards Europe. While the Atlantis was on her way, the Kriegsmarine thought it a genius idea to send the pride of their navy, the Bismarck, without much of an escort at all into the Atlantic, because, look, I don't know what they were thinking, and I'm sure someone is ready to teach me about just how genius this little maneuver was. But the important part is that the Atlantis, receiving message of the Bismarck's departure, figured the waters around Europe to be swarming with Royal Navy ships. So they decided to wait with their journey home. In the following weeks, they encountered and sunk the freighter Rabaul and the freighter Trafalgar, the freighter Tottenham and the freighter Balzac. On the 16th of September 1941, they captured the Norwegian motor vessel Silvaplana, and for about a month didn't find any other ships. But what they did was trade with the inhabitants of Vana Vana Island, without the French authorities on that very island even noticing. Funnily, the French only noticed after the war, when German equipment was found in the houses of the natives. After that, once again, Rogge decided to head for the Atlantic, destination home. Around mid of October 1941, the Kriegsmarine decided their radars weren't effective enough and should instead serve as mobile refueling stations for U-boats. This will be the first step in the inevitable demise of the Atlantis. Rogge, still on his route to Europe, followed his orders and on the 18th of October rendezvoused with U-86 800 kilometers south of St. Helena to refuel the submarine and to change the appearance of the Atlantis to that of the Dutch ship Polyphemus. A month later, on the 22nd of November 1941, they were to rendezvous with U-126 at Ascension Island. Unbeknownst to the Germans, the Enigma code the U-boats used had been cracked, and the Royal Navy knew about the meeting and had sent heavy cruiser HMS Devonshire to destroy the Atlantis and U-126. At first, everything was going according to plan. The Atlantis and U-126 were floating next to each other, a bridge from one deck to another, and a fuel pump doing her job refueling the U-boat. Suddenly, a smokestack is spotted, and only seconds after, the arriving ship is identified, a British heavy cruiser. U-126 emergency dived, leaving her captain behind, who was, at the time, on the Atlantis. The Atlantis, betting on their disguise, began to transmit via radio, posing as the Dutch ship Polyphemus. The heavy cruiser Devonshire stopped in her tracks, consulting the Royal Navy about a possible Dutch ship in the area. Devonshire sat out of range for the Atlantis guns for about an hour, until she received confirmation about the Dutch ship being the raider she was sent to sink. The Devonshire opened fire with her 8-inch guns. Atlantis was hit multiple times, and without being able to return fire, Rogge ordered to self-sink the ship. After watching the Atlantis sink, the Devonshire left, and U-126 resurfaced, planning to tow the Atlantis lifeboats towards Brazil. 2 days of towing the lifeboats later, they met up with another U-boat refueling ship, the Python. The Python picked up the, one might say, Atlantean crew and headed for Europe. On their way, the Python had to meet up with UA and U-126 again to refuel them, but just like before, the U-boat Enigma had been solved, so the British Navy knew about this meetup as well, and the British cruiser Dorsetshire was en route. Once again, after spotting the British cruiser, UA and U-126 emergency dived, and once again the refueling ship self-destructs. Because of UA and U-126 present, the Dorsetshire fled the scene after confirming Python disappear into the waves. And just like before, the U-boats surfaced after the British warship had left. They took the crew of the Python and the Atlantis on board and headed home. At the end of December, all of them returned home safely. All in all, the Atlantis was one of the most efficient and most successful raiders of them all, with 102,000 sea miles traveled in her singular voyage, not having anchored in any harbor after leaving Germany in March of 1940. Not counting the days they took to get back home via submarine, they were 622 days at sea and sent 144,348 tons of ships and their cargo to the depth of the ocean. The captain of the ship this is all about, Bernhard Rogge, had the life any wartime captain can only dream of. He was always respected and liked by his crew and fellow sailors. But it needs to be said, Bernhard Rogge's mission was technically a violation of the Geneva Convention, as disguising soldiers as civilians and then attacking the unsuspecting enemy is forbidden by international law of war. But although his mission was in violation of the laws of war, he was one of the only high-ranking German officers not to get arrested by the Allies after the war, due to the way he had exercised his command of the Atlantis. In the words of J. Armstrong White, the captain of the SS City of Baghdad, the ship the Atlantis destroyed in June of 1940, his treatment of prisoners left respect instead of hatred. Bernhard Rogge later joined the West German Bundesmarine and retired 1962 as Konteradmiral. He died on the 29th of June 1982 at 82 years old.